Maggie. Welcome to Experiments in Crafting. So yesterday I was messing around with the community tab on YouTube, and I thought I would do a poll and ask people whether they prefer the format that we had last week, where it was just mostly questions and answers with no real agenda or topic set, and then or whether they'd prefer an actual agenda or topic. And it was a really close poll. A handful of you guys voted. I think it was like 11 or so, which was way more than I expected, because I don't know how the community tab works at all on YouTube. But anyway, the majority said that they prefer a topic, and that left me with a little bit of a problem of what the topic was going to be. So I thought I would talk about indie dyed yarns tonight. So indie dyed yarns are yarns that are made by independent dyers. So indie is just a shortening of independent. They're usually wool, though they could be any fiber type that's not acrylic. For the most part, acrylic is pretty difficult to dye, and so most individual people are not set up to dye acrylic. For the most part, it's dyed with like industrial dyes, and you really won't find acrylic, polyester, things like that in most of the indie dyed yarns. The exception being sock yarns sometimes contain some nylon. A very common blend is merino cashmere nylon. So, but anyway, the end result of that is I have a whole boatload of indie dyed yarns that I've picked up from shows, from yarn stores, from individual dyers' websites, and I thought that I would just start showing you some of the basics and where to start. I guess I should be upfront. Yarns from independent dyers cost more than yarns from big box stores, and that's just a fact of what they are. They took some individual person, their effort, their time, and for that reason they generally cost more. They're also usually made with more expensive materials. So I understand that not everyone can put these yarns into their budget, but it's just something that's out there in the crochet community, and I kind of wanted to share just the intro to it. It might be something that you can only, add into your budget every so often, or maybe it's just something that you just don't even know where to get started, because the world of yarn is so gigantic and it can be really overwhelming. So I just thought I'd share some of my favorite dyers and some of my favorite materials, and see where it goes from there. And then towards the end, we'll do the standard question and answers. You can feel free to suggest topics for future videos. I'm going to try and live stream more regularly so that more people can join us sort of on a schedule, but we'll see how that goes. And then I guess the other thing is you can ask any questions that you'd like at the end. If you have questions about yarns that you're using, questions about the indie dyed yarns, whatever you want to ask about crochet and yarn wise, I'm happy to take those questions and try and give you answers the best I can. So I'm going to keep checking on the comments, so just comment away, and if you need to see something up close or something like that, let us know, and we'll switch camera views so that you can get a better view of stuff. Okay. So I see a handful of people are joined us, a whole bunch of people saying good evening, and I actually just realized I am not mic'd up. So hopefully you were able to hear most of that. I think the mic was close enough, and sorry about this. I'm going to put my lav mic on so that you can actually hear me. A couple of people saying hello and good evening, and welcome to the person who said that they're new, and welcome to anybody else who hasn't commented that is also new. So I have a heap of yarn, which you guys can't see, sitting next to me, and I'm going to just start pulling some out and talking about some of the different features and what to do with some of these yarns. And my tablet's going to go to sleep. Sorry about that. So anyway, what I started pulling out here are indie dyed gradients, or gradients available from independent dyers. So I have a handful of different ones here. I talk about indie dyed gradients a lot when I'm talking about gradient big box store yarns. And my general conclusion is that they don't usually hold up, or they're not usually to the same caliber. There's usually something that's not quite as good as an indie dyed gradient in the big box yarns. The one major exception that I can think of is the shawl in a ball or shawl in a cake. That's actually a really good gradient. But for the most part, most of the gradient yarns are decent approximations, but not true gradients like you would get from a dyer. So I have a number of different ones here. This one is from Twisted Fiber Art. Twisted Fiber Art is pretty much all gradients all the time. They have a number of different bases. And this one is their Glamour base. So usually when you're talking about indie dyed yarns, they have a base and then they have colorways. Colorway is usually, instead of color, because they're not just like this doesn't have a color, it's a bunch of colors. So that the name for that thing is a colorway. That's a set of colors in a particular order, or dye pattern. So this colorway is Bliss. The name of the base is Glamour. Glamour is Twisted Fiber Arts sparkly base. So but I have a number of different other options here. These are a couple of gradients that I picked up from Spotted Circus at the alpaca show. I did a little tutorial. The National Alpaca Show was in Peoria for some reason, which is very close to where I live, and so we went over there and looked around, and you can see the whole show if you want to check out that video on the channel. But I got these. This one is merino wool and nylon. This one's 100% alpaca, but both are gradient dyed, and they're both pretty cool. I just haven't had a chance to use them yet. This is a little bit different. This is a gradient set, which means that they're not all connected and dyed perfectly. So these ones, as you're going through the gradients, they're going to color change as you work through the colors. This one, you have to do the color changes yourself. So these are individual little skeins here. A lot of times gradient sets are intended, you can either use them all in a series, or you can put a solid color between them and sort of break it up into like an interesting pattern. So gradient sets give you a little bit more flexibility that gradient yarns don't have. This one is from Gail's Art. And then I have a hanked gradient. This is, so when you buy indie dyed yarns, a lot of times they're sold in hanks, like these twisted up. They kind of look like a sort of a pretzel or a twisted up donut. And this form factor is called a hank. And hanks of yarn, it's sometimes difficult to tell if it's going to be a gradient or if it's going to be a variegated yarn. And I'll show you some variegated yarns in a second. But you can see the striping here, and that striping usually indicates that you've got something that's dyed with long color changes. If you have chunks of color, that usually is going to indicate that you have a variegated or a speckled yarn. So when you take this apart, you'll get a big loop, and you'll see that the loop changes color over time versus changing color in sections like this. And that would, as you pull the yarn off, let me unwrap this and it'll be easier to explain here. So when I take this off, you can see that as I pull this off, it's going to go from pink to green to sort of a mulberry color to purple to gray. if I grab one of my variegated skeins, yeah, I can move this. Oh, too loud. Okay. Yeah. All right. That might be better. Sorry, the audio, I guess, is just a little bit crackly or popping because it's too close to me and too loud. So we're going to, I guess it's a lot crackly. I can back it away from me. Okay. Sorry, we're having a little bit of audio issue. Hopefully you can bear with us while we try and figure that out. So this is a variegated colorway, and you can tell because when I hold this out, as you unwrap this yarn, you're going to get gray, a little section of gray, a little section of purple, a little section of orange, a little section of aqua, and then those colors repeated again. Orange, purple, gray, purple, all the way around as you pull them off. The colors aren't changing in order like this one here. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'll show you some projects worked up with these two different kinds of yarn so that you can get a little bit of a sense here. To put these yarns back, you usually just have to spin them up and then get them to turn. I don't have this one spun nearly enough. So I'm going to keep trying to watch comments while I'm talking here. If you have any questions about any of these particular yarns or brands or anything like that. There's my hank. It's never as good as when it comes from the store. I'm never as good at doing that. And then one of the other types of gradient yarn that you can get from an independent person is these stranded cotton yarns. I think this is 100% cotton. Nope, I'm wrong. 50% cotton, 50% polyester. And you'll remember I said at the beginning that indie dyers don't usually dye polyester. This is an exception because the dyer, the independent yarn seller in this case, did not dye this yarn. These yarns are bought in the different colors, and then little knots are tied off in between the colors, but the colors themselves come pre-dyed from an industrial dyer, which is why there can be polyester or acrylic in it. But yeah, so this is 50-50 cotton poly blend. You run 4 strands together. One of the things that I really like when they come from a independent seller versus a big box store is they tie them together and they put like a little charm on here so that you know that you're supposed to work all 4 of these together. I think that's a big problem with some of the yarns that they've been selling, like Lion Brand and Red Heart. They don't really give any instructions on the label that says, hey, you're supposed to pull all 4 of these strands together. They just sort of expect you to know what to do. We're going to try changing lav mics with the hope that the audio is a little bit better. Okay, so hopefully this is going a little bit better. Bear with us just a second here and I'll keep talking about yarn. If anyone's got any questions, now would be a good time to throw those questions out there and I can take a look at those. And also, if there continue to be any audio problems or anything like that, please let us know. My husband's monitoring the chat and he'll make fixes as quick as he can if you can let us know that there's problems. Okay. So that's pretty much gradients. Your choices are all in one package or gradient sets. And then there's also this sort of third option of not really a dyed gradient, but a color changing yarn. This particular type of yarn with the stranded cotton is available in big box stores. You can get the Red Heart It's a Wrap Rainbow, the Red Heart It's a Wrap Sprinkles, and Lion Brand Wrap Star and Ombre Life are all this type of stranded yarn. Gradients like this you pretty much can only get from independent dyers.
All right, hopefully we're back and the audio issues will be taken care of. All right, so I'm going to set the gradient stuff aside. If you have any questions about gradients or want to see these up close or anything like that, just let us know. I'm going to set them aside for right now and move on to variegated yarns. Oh, but one more thing before I switch. I did want to show you a couple of shawls. I'm going to hang on one second. Well, I can lay these out on the table here. So this is a gradient dyed yarn. This is actually from Fiber Optic Yarns, and Fiber Optic Yarns has a cool thing where they have a gradient, but then you can also buy the color that goes on either end. So you can get more. This one goes from gold to blue, and this blue they call damson. So it goes gold to damson, and you can either get an extra skein of gold or an extra skein of damson to extend the shawl out. And so this is the shawl that I made for my wedding, which was a fall wedding, and it went with my hair, and it looked really nice with my dress and everything, at least I thought. And so it was, I did an extra skein of blue to start with, and so it was a lot of blue, and then faded out to this really pretty gradient on the edge. So that's one of the examples you can do, sort of a project with a gradient yarn if you have access to an extra skein of the end color. And again, Fiber Optic Yarn sort of specializes in that particular type of thing. This is a, pull these off so you can see them individually. Thanks for letting us know that the audio is better too. This is one of the Glamour yarns from Twisted Fiber Arts. Sorry, the one of similar to this one that I showed you up here. This is just a simple shawl that I made. It was worked from the dark end out to the light end, and then the light end I worked around the edge, so you can see it really kind of show off against the dark edge. So again, this is another one from Twisted Fiber Arts. And then this shawl that I have here was a ball of the stranded cotton yarn. This was one from Wooltrum. There's a seller on Etsy called My Melody by Wooltrum, and she imports yarn from Switzerland, I think, and is the US distributor here. So sometimes she's got stuff available that you can just go online and buy, and she'll have it shipped to you in like 3 days. Other times you have to wait, I think, for like the 1st and the 15th, where she places orders to Switzerland. She imports them all into the US and then sends them out, so you don't have to pay international shipping. So this is a colorway from her. And I was really happy with how this worked out. I wear this shawl actually kind of a lot. It's really a nice lightweight, even though it's like giant, because it's cotton. It's really not too warm to wear on just like even a decent summer day. I mean, if it's 95 and humid out, I don't wear a shawl, but if it's cool in the morning, I usually put one on. So this is just another example of a gradient. Comfort Creek Ranch, which pattern? If you're talking about this one, I will have to get back to you because honestly, I do not remember offhand. This one was called like Geometric Shawl. It was very generically named. I can pull that out of my Ravelry library in just a couple of minutes. And then the last one was called Big Love, or the one that I made for my wedding was called Big Love. I don't know why I cannot remember this pattern, but I could find it in a couple of minutes on Ravelry, and I will do that for you. Just give me a couple minutes here. Actually, if you don't, I mean, I can look real fast. Let me look. While we're sitting here, I'll continue to talk and pull yarns out and multitask so I can get that pattern name because it'll drive me crazy. I'm going to pull out some variegated colorways. I got a whole bunch here. These are all from one dyer. So let me try and grab some other ones. So variegated colorways seem to be the most popular with indie dyers. They like to do variegated and they like to do speckled. Often they're themed in some fashion. So if you go to yarn shows, you'll notice each dyer tends to have sort of their own thing about them. And what I mean by that is, sorry, there are dyers that base all of their colorways off of location. So they'll take a picture and they'll match the colors that they see in the picture to a yarn color that they're doing. There's a overwhelming amount of dyers who do movie-based or TV show-based. So the most popular thing around has been Harry Potter and Game of Thrones. When you're at shows, there's a half a dozen dyers who are Harry Potter and Game of Thrones themed colorways. Some do comic books, some do all different sorts of things. So it just really depends on what you're looking for. And then other dyers just sort of do whatever interests them. So it's just a matter of what they, what they're interested in, what inspires them. So I have a whole bunch of yarn here by Sock Obsession Yarns. I've been a little bit obsessed with their colors. They have beautiful photography and really, really nice yarn. The colorways really come very close to what they're showing online. So I have an extra large skein here. This is 150 grams instead of a typical 100. Mostly I buy sock yarn. Which is great for 100-gram shawls. Occasionally I want a little bit bigger shawl, and so you can get a 150 or 200-gram ball of sock yarn. Typically, you don't get more than that in one ball. You have to start buying multiples of them. So 150-gram balls are kind of nice because you can get sort of a larger shawl out of them. So again, Sock Obsession Yarns. This one is one that's just really bright in color from Queen's Yarn Boutique. It's a 75% merino, 25% nylon. Sock yarns tend to have a little bit of nylon in them. So the nylon serves to add a little bit of stretch and like memory to the socks. So when you put socks on, you want them to hold on and sort of bounce back. You don't want them to continue to stretch out while you wear them. And so the nylon sort of serves to hold the wool together. I don't know if that's the best description of what it's doing, but that's basically the premise, is that it just is sort of bringing everything back together. You can certainly, if you happen to knit and you happen to knit socks, you can certainly do them at 100% wool. I've heard tons and tons of people just do 100% wool, but most sock knitters seem to want a little bit of nylon in there. So this mostly are wool nylon blends. I would guess most of them are. Here, occasionally I get some 100% wool, or I'll get a MCN blend, which is merino cashmere nylon. You can get some really interesting blends. So this one is merino nylon tencel, and tencel is a wood pulp derivative. It's really, really silky soft. I think I have a skein of 100% tencel if I go digging in my bins here. But yeah, so just some interesting stuff here. This one is from Gypsy Stardust. I actually got this from Yarn Box. I don't remember if this was from the Yarn Box when they used to do subscriptions, or if it was from the clearance, because Yarn Box had a big clearance, and so I got a bunch of yarn from them. Occasionally something happens and I lose a label, and so I don't have a good idea of what this is. I think this also came from Yarn Box, and I'm near positive it came in the clearance stuff that I got, but I do not remember what this is. I may have another skein in here that has a label on it, and I can go digging for it, but it's a pretty color. So I see that there's a couple of questions and some questions about cost. So, like I said at the beginning, these yarns are expensive. Generally, they run, I would say, between $20 and $30 a skein, depends on who you buy it from. And really, it just depends on what you want to do with it. You don't have to have expensive yarn. They do feel different than some of the yarns that you can get in big box stores. Generally, I find it relatively difficult to find very fine yarns. So I like sock yarns and sock weight shawls, and it can be a challenge to find really interesting colorways at Michaels and Joann in the lightweight yarns. It doesn't really make these better, but it is different and interesting. There are plenty of yarns coming out every day from Lion Brand and Red Heart and Bernat to keep anyone busy and interested in yarn. But this is just a sort of a whole different side world going on in the fiber arts community of these women, typically, not always, who are dyeing yarns and selling it to other women who make stuff out of them. So it's kind of just a fun part of the community. It's a lot of fun to go wander around big yarn shows and just see what people are doing. And you can go and touch and feel a lot of the yarns, and it's just something to do all day, and it's kind of fun to do. I guess the other thing that I would say is that it's kind of fun just to treat yourself every once in a while, and if it's in your budget or you can justify it for a birthday present or a Christmas present, you don't really know what else you want. Sometimes yarn is just fun to have. It's fun to have a really nice ball of yarn that you can make into a really nice project. So I don't know. I guess it's really whether it's worth it to you. I have found that if you can catch a going out of business sale on a yarn store or brands like that, you can get really good deals on some of this stuff, and that makes it a little bit easier to justify the cost. I've gotten some for, you know, 20 all the way to, 60 or 70% off. So it really just depends on what sorts of deals you come across. Like I said, Yarn Box has sort of a discount or clearance section right now. I think it's called like yarnboxorders.com, and they sort of restock that every so often. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it's really a personal preference, but I kind of thought it would be fun to just show some of the different options, and if you've been considering getting some indie dyed yarn or you want one for yourself, just sort of giving everybody an idea of some brands and where to start and what to look for. So hopefully that answers your question. So I've got unlimited yarn. I can go through each of these brands. Honey Girl Farms is one that I see at most of the yarn shows that I go to. The dyer is a very nice lady, and like I said, I like to see her stuff. And so this was one that I got as part of a yarn exchange on a Discord that I'm on. This one is from Manos de Uruguay, called Alegria. And the name of this colorway is Acero. And it's one that I have used in the past. I made a really pretty shawl, and then I sold it to somebody. And then I bought another skein of this to make another one, and I think I gave it away. And so this is my third skein, and I'm finally going to make it and keep it for myself. And then this is one from Expression Fiber Arts. I don't know if you guys use Instagram or Facebook and follow Expression Fiber Arts at all. Her pictures and her photography are absolutely stunning. Her yarn is amazing, but I don't know. I just like to sit and look at all of her pictures. I think she does a really nice job of matching her pictures to her yarn, and I don't know, it's just, they're really beautiful to look at. Even if you don't want to buy the yarn itself, the images are just something to look at. They're really spectacular. So these are all different variations of variegated colorways. So you've got lots of very short color changes. Some of these are even what I would call speckled. The color changes on these are so short that when this works up, it's going to look like it's been like splatter painted. Some of these have longer color changes, and they're going to be work up in like little chunks of that color. So you might have 4 or 5 stitches that are one color, and then it'll change to another color. So I've got some examples of shawls made out of that, and then I'll kind of look. So thank you to the new people who've joined us. Welcome. And somebody asked if any of it's acrylic. So for the most part, indie dyed yarns have to be natural fibers because natural fibers are what's easy to dye. Most people don't have access to the ability to dye acrylic. It's just dyed in industrial, dyed in an industrial fashion. I could get into the science of it, but it's really difficult to get acrylic to dye. I think for the most part, it's dyed as it's produced. So the short answer is no. They're generally not acrylic. However, the concern for machine washing. So you can machine wash most superwash wool. I wouldn't recommend it, but they say you can do it. I would do it on like a gentle cycle, and I probably would not machine dry it. But all of these yarns and most yarns that you buy from indie dyers are going to be superwash. And what that means is when wool comes off of the sheep, it has each individual fiber, when you look at it under a microscope, has scales, and they look like dragon scales on the outside of the hair. And there is a process that will remove those scales, and the scales are what causes wool not to be machine washable. So if you buy a pair of wool pants and it's not made of superwash wool, it still has the scale on it. And when you put it in the wash machine, those scales will rub against each other and lock in place. And they can't move back, and they sort of act almost like a zip tie. Once you pull them, you can't like undo it. They lock against each other. And so that is a process called felting. So you might see videos online of people who felt, and so they take wool and they repeatedly stab it with a needle, and that causes the fibers to interlock and make felt. And they make beautiful, I guess sculptures is the best word for it. Just all sorts of, you see like little animals modeled out of felt, and they're really, really cool. But that works because wool will lock against itself. And so generally when you're buying hand-dyed yarn, because the dyers have to get it hot and then cool it down and rinse it out, they are generally looking to work with superwash wool just because they have to handle it and they have to sell the product and not turn it into a giant felt ball. So if you haven't felt, if you haven't touched wool that's superwash instead of wool that's just, they just call it non-superwash, but just natural wool straight off the sheep, they feel way, way different. Some of these wools are way, way softer than you'd ever imagine could possibly be wool. So the short answer to that is no, they're not acrylic, but yes, they're probably still machine washable. I would probably still hand wash all of my items because they take a really long time to make, and I wouldn't want them to get caught or snag in a wash machine. If you have a wash machine that doesn't have the center thing in it, because a lot of them don't anymore. Like a front load wash machine, it's probably fine. There's a lot less space for it to get caught on, but I would still probably hand wash all of my items, and I do hand wash all of my items. Just kind of glancing through comments here. All right. Welcome to everyone who's joining us. We're just talking about indie yarns. If you have any questions about yarns on screen or yarns in general, go ahead and leave those in the chat right now, and I will try and take them as I can. So we've talked about gradient yarns. These are, for the most part, these are all variegated yarns. Some are a little bit more speckly than others, and I'm going to show you some example shawls here. Let's see, what else do I have here? Sorry, I'm digging in a very deep box of shawls. All right, so I've got a handful here. This one just had a little, it was mostly gray and it had a little splash of color, and you can see the little splashes of colors have worked their way up into the shawl, and hopefully you can see that. We might have to go to the zoomed in version here. So you can see mostly it was gray, and then there's just some little speckles worked in. That would probably be most similar to a yarn like this, where you can see primarily all of it is teal, but then there's just some little speckles throughout. That would work up somewhat similar to this gray shawl here. This one is more of a true variegated. It might not show up real well on the wide view, but on the close-up, you can see that it's pretty much all different colors through. So there's some pinks, there's some blues, there's some gray, there's some light gray, and they change pretty randomly. And that would be similar to a yarn like this, where you can see there's a short section of light blue, there's a short section of dark blue, there's a little bit of purple, and it's changing rapidly back and forth. And then I have a yarn like this, which was gray. This one was intentionally dyed so that there's one loop at the bottom, and I don't think I have anything like this on hand. But there was one section of color at the very edge of this that went pink, orange, yellow, blue, green, and then reversed. And it was just a long section. So you would work this up and it would be gray, 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 and then giant rainbow, and then all the way around. And because I worked this in the round, the rainbows sort of pooled together and make a really cool pattern. I really like wearing this in the winter. I pretty much tuck it in with everything I'm wearing. So you should be able to see pretty well there. Yeah, so that's just some examples of some variegated yarns. Apparently everything I've got here is gray tonight, but I have tons of variegated colors. That's what was in the bin. All right. So the last big category is tonal yarns, and let me take I'm going to take a second here and catch up. So yeah, there's, I didn't specifically pull the rainbow one out for Pride Month, but it's a good example of that, I guess. There are a ton of dyers I know right now doing all sorts of stuff for Pride Month and having big sales on their rainbow colorways. But yeah, it was just one that I picked that I happen to have on hand for an example of variegated yarn. Yeah, I'm just kind of glancing through comments here. And I'm glad that questions are getting answered. If you ask something and I miss it, just let me know that I missed it. I'm trying to keep up with comments, but there are a lot of them, and I'm talking a lot. So the last section, or the last category, I guess, are tonal yarns, which most people would just call solid. But when you get yarns from hand dyers, solid isn't the same as solid acrylic. And what I mean by that is, if I take this solid green, it's exactly the same green all the way throughout. There's no variation. It is just, it's the same color green at the beginning as it was at the end, and there's not really any difference throughout the ball. When you go to like an indie dyer, solids don't look exactly like this. And let me find a couple here to show you. And I don't know how well these are going to show up on camera, so here are some solids or tonals. All of these yarns are meant to be a solid color. They're not meant to be color changing, but they have differences. There's lights and darks, and these work up beautifully, and there really isn't anything like them from big box stores. You can't really get this level of variation and sort of blend and beauty out of some of the yarns. And that's not to say that the yarns from big box stores are not good. There's something unique about this dye process. So I have a handful of yarns here. This one is a yarn store brand called Classic Elites. This is again from fiber optic yarn, similar to the yarn that I used on my wedding shawl that I showed earlier. And then this one is from Fiber Story. These are all examples of tonals. And I have this one here that I've worked up. This is intended to be sort of all a blue single color, but there are variations where it's lighter and darker, and it just gives it a little bit of intrigue. This one is from Insanity, I think is the name of the dyer here. It's really a cool colorway. She's just starting up a shop. I don't even know if it's available, but if it is, I asked her to send me a link, and I'll put that in the chat. She's a brand new indie dyer out of Canada, just getting, her shop out into the world. So I did some testing for her. She sent me this yarn, and I worked it up into this and sent her pictures and feedback back. And then I did bead the edge of this. The beads are pretty hard to see because they blend in really well, but hopefully they're catching the light a little bit. And they give a nice clinky noise when they hit the table. So they just give it kind of a nice weight. I kind of enjoy beading if it's a small amount of beading. But yeah, so that's sort of an example of a tonal yarn worked up. So I could go on for days and days about indie dyed yarn. I could start sharing a bajillion different dyers and vendors. There's probably 100 dyers that I absolutely love and didn't show here. And so I guess if you guys have questions about any of these yarns, if you want to see more stuff, I'll keep pulling more out. You guys tell me. So I'm going to look at the comments here and see what's going on here. Also, I do see all the compliments. I never know quite how to respond, but thank you very much for all the compliments on the different projects. Just Mel, I 100% agree. This purple is absolutely beautiful, and it has a gradient that it matches, which I've got right here. So this is another one of these sets from Fiber Optic Yarns, where it goes from this pale yellow all the way to the dark purple, and then you can keep working with the dark purple, or you can start with dark purple and work out to yellow, like I did with my wedding shawl. So again, that works up like this, where you've got gradient, 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 and then you've got a whole skein of another color that you can work with. So there's all the gradient out to an extra whole skein. So yeah, I really like this format where you can get an extra skein and have keep working on the gradient, because what tends to happen is when you work a shawl, you have a big section of one of the colors, and then because the shawl is getting bigger, your rows are getting thinner. And so if you can kind of compensate by having extra of one color to work on the edge, you can kind of balance the shawl a little bit better. And it really depends on what sort of pattern you pick. If you go like a triangle that's worked out like this, your chunks tend to stay a little bit more even. But yeah. So, yeah, I'm just trying to keep an eye here on comments. All right. So, yeah, if you guys have questions on any of this stuff, I'm going to take questions now, and it can be on anything. It does not have to be on this yarn. If you guys have questions about other topics, other yarns that you've been working with, struggling with, you have questions about crochet, you have questions about hooks or things like that, now would be the time to ask those. If you have suggestions for future video topics, I love hearing those. I always would prefer working on a video that somebody asked for instead of a video that I just came up with, because I never know if what I come up with is something that anyone wants to hear. I did take your suggestions from last week, in particular the standing double crochet or the chainless double crochet video that people were asking for, and I've got all of my swatches worked up and ready to put that video together, so that should be available pretty soon. I never want to give a date because things always come up, but hopefully that will be available like the next video that we release. So just kind of flipping through comments here. I owe Comfort Creek Ranch a pattern, so I'm going to be super unprofessional and pull up my phone and look up this pattern, because it's driving me crazy that I cannot think of what it was. I have a feeling I know what it is. If I remember correctly, it's in a foreign language. The title is, and I'll butcher it. It's something with a ETH of some sort. I just have to find it in my extensive library. I don't know how you guys organize patterns that you like on Ravelry. I know for the most part, people use like hearts, and I always put them into my library, and then Ravelry just recently started not letting you put patterns you don't own into your library. You have to say, yes, I own it, and a lot of times I forget to hit that, and then I don't save a pattern, and then I have to go hunting for it and try and remember what it's called. So I need to find a better way to organize my patterns. I know that this pattern is free, not that that helps anything. And it was really popular for a while, and it's driving me crazy that I can't find it. So I'm going to flip through a couple more pages and try and keep talking while I do so. But anyway, if you guys have more questions, it could be that pattern. I really feel like it had a TH in it. I know that's a crazy thing to think, but anyway, I will, I guess, Comfort Creek Ranch, do you follow me on either Facebook or Instagram? I can message you on one of those platforms when I find the pattern. I can also post it in the comment section or the description on the video once the video processes after we're done being live. Because it's going to drive me crazy if I don't find it and get it to you. So anyway, moving back to your comments, your questions. Anybody have anything they want to talk about in particular? Like I said, I can just keep pulling more yarn out. I have a crazy amount of yarn sitting next to me. So if there's anything you guys want to see, if there's a particular brand that you've been considering and you want to ask me what I think of it, or if I've touched or felt it in person, I'm happy to try and help you out there too. So some people are asking for more yarn. I'll just keep pulling yarn out. I can show yarn all day. So I've got some interesting stuff here. Let's see, what do I got? Oh, actually, this yarn is very similar to this yarn. So this yarn, I was saying, was primarily gray and then had these rainbow sections. This yarn is dyed very similarly. So it has big gray sections and then little rainbow sections on the edge. And so this is going to work up. You'll have long, long sections of gray, and then you'll have green, purple, light blue, purple, green. And they'll just be in like a little chunk. And then if you work them up in rounds like this, then they'll start to pool together, assuming you've got pretty decent tension. So this one is from a Whimsical Wood yarn company. And let's see, I've got yarn for days over here. I'm just going to pull out some random stuff. So let's see, who else do we have? Haute-knit, Haute. I can never pronounce that. Like haute couture, I think is. But anyway, she makes beautiful yarn. She's another dyer that has absolutely gorgeous pictures on her Instagram. The kind of pictures that make you want to start dyeing yarn on your own and then realize that that's a crazy idea. But yeah, this is her Jimmy Sock. Jimmy Sock is the base, and the name of the colorway is Summer Beverage. It's got lots of fun summery colors. It's a really, really nice, soft, looks like, again, merino nylon blend. Yeah. Good yarn for a dog shirt. I guess that would probably depend on the dog. If I was going to be making something for a really small dog, fine sock yarn like these would be fine. If you're just looking for regular old, not fancy yarns, but just regular big box store yarns, Bernat came out with a pet line that was supposed to be antimicrobial. I have a little bit of that somewhere in a box I could dig out. Yeah, it's a big puffy yarn, so I would really reserve that for like a medium to larger size dog. As far as little dogs, like say like a Chihuahua, I've used just regular worsted weight yarn, just because you need to make relatively small stitches. If you use gigantic yarn, for a tiny dog, you're only going to have like 6 stitches across, and you're not going to be able to do much with that pattern wise. So I made a really cute cabled sweater for my mother-in-law's dog, and it lasted a couple of years. She used it on one dog, and then the next dog, as the first one outgrew it. And I just made that out of, it was a Red Heart with Love. It came in a really, really pretty peacock blue color that I liked. So it was acrylic. Yeah, it was 100% acrylic. Red Heart with Love is sort of their nice. So Red Heart Super Saver is known sort of as like the budget yarn. It comes in a billion colors, and it's relatively cheap, and you get a lot of it. It's great for like donation projects and stuff, because you can make a lot for a little amount of money. It's not known for its softness, so it can be a little bit scratchy. It can be a little bit rough to work with. it softens up over time. But Red Heart with Love tends to be a much nicer yarn to start with and holds up pretty well. And so I guess that's probably where I would aim for a small dog. I would pick a worsted weight yarn or even a DK weight yarn that feels relatively nice and wouldn't be uncomfortable. But I guess I would go acrylic for dogs, just because you don't, you're going to want to be able to machine wash it regularly, and you want it to hold up over a lot of wear and tear. So that's probably where I would go with that. Favorite acrylic yarn from the big box stores. Let's see, what do I use the most of? Premier makes a line by Deborah Norville. I think it's Premier Every Day. I tend to use that for baby blankets. It works up. My grandmother always made white baby blankets for all of her nieces and nephews and whoever, friends of friends. And so after she passed away, I kind of took over making them for all of my cousins and whatnot. And so finding a really nice white yarn for baby blankets was kind of a challenge. I don't always have a ton of time, and so I usually want a worsted weight instead of a DK weight. And most of the baby yarns come in DK weight, and they just work up a little bit slower. So the Deborah Norville Premier Every Day worked up really well, held up really well. I hate when acrylics shed terribly. And by that I mean, if you're sitting and you're working on a project, you don't want to be covered in fuzz when you get up. I've noticed some of the softer, fluffier acrylics tend to shed terribly. I guess other than that, I used to make doll clothes. I had fun. I had some nieces and they were into their dolls, and they had some 18-inch American Girl doll type dolls, and I made lots of little dresses and stuff for them. And for that, I always went with Karen Simply Soft. And Karen Simply Soft is perfect for that application. It's okay for things like fingerless mittens and stuff like that. But anything that's going to get a lot of wear and tear and sort of take a beating, it is not good for. It pills pretty horrendously very, very quickly. I made some kids some leg warmers, and I think they lasted exactly one day until they looked like absolute trash. I couldn't believe how bad it pilled in just a really short amount of time. So I think for low use things, you can get away with Karen Simply Soft. It feels really, really nice and comes in a zillion colors. The one thing I would mention about that is Simply Soft says that it's a number 4 weight yarn, and that's really not true. It's a DK weight by all of my estimates. I guess it might technically be a number 4 or a really, really light number 4, but I definitely would say that it's a DK weight yarn. How do I choose what yarn for what pattern? So a really good pattern designer, if we're going back to talking about something like these indie yarns, a lot of times you spend a lot of money on them and you want like the perfect pattern for them. A really good pattern designer will tell you this will work really well with tonals and gradients, but will look terrible with variegated. Um, and some of that just comes with knowing the territory. If you have a pattern like this, where it's just tight rows of double crochet, there's not a whole lot of interest going on in this pattern. It's got pretty ornate edges, but really the body of it is pretty solid, and you could get away with a pretty crazy yarn here. It looks beautiful in a tonal, but it would look fine in some of these crazier variegated yarns. If you go with an intricate pattern, like What do I got here that's super intricate? Here, this one. I'm drowning in yarn here. Let me push some of this stuff off to the side. So, if you go with a super intricate pattern, so this pattern has a lot going on. This is from one of my favorite pattern designers. It's Rachel Newen Designs. I did a lot of test patterns for her. I haven't done so many recently because I've been working on the YouTube channel and working a whole bunch, but this is her sugar plum shawl. I wear this to most of my craft or yarn shows because it looks really, really good with my hair. But this pattern has a lot going on. It's got these intricate shells, there's open work, there's all sorts of there's a lot to see in the pattern itself. This pattern would be terrible with a crazy yarn, like something like this or like this, where it's going to work up in like little bunches. You're going to lose the pattern entirely. So I guess my advice would be take a look on Ravelry and see what yarn people have made the project with. That's always a really good place to start. So you can do projects both ways. You can go to a yarns page and find it and then look up and see what projects people have made with that yarn. So if you went to the store and you bought, we'll use this Good For You yarn. This Good For You Clawda yarn. You can go to Clawda's page on Ravelry and see what people have made. And there's a whole lot I know of, like color work, a lot of knitting, sweaters and stuff like that. And you can see what those look like worked up. Or you can go from the opposite direction. You can find a pattern you like, and if you click the project page on the pattern on Ravelry, it will show you all of the yarns people have worked with on that project. So you can hit this from both directions. You can say, okay, I really, really am in love with this yarn. What did people make with it? Okay, I'll make that thing. Or you can say, I really, really love this pattern. What kind of yarn did people use to work it up? Oh, I really love that project. I'm going to buy the yarn that they used. So you can hit this from both directions. And really, that's how I decide what to use. And like I said, you get a feel for certain patterns will work with certain yarns. And some of it is trial and error. Sometimes you work up a pattern that was a bad idea. I've got an example of that in here. So this, my husband's cringing over there. This is a yarn that I really liked. It was a cool looking yarn, very fall, pumpkin-y looking yarn. This was a absolutely terrible pattern for this yarn. Part of this was my inexperience. This was like the second or third shawl that I made ever. And I think I did triple crochets instead of double crochets, so it ended up working up like a fishnet. But also, it was a really bad choice in yarn. A pattern this open, I would not use a variegated yarn like this because it just gets totally lost and looks crazy. This would be a much better pattern for a tonal yarn. Maybe a gradient, but probably not. But yeah, part of the problem with this is my fault. Part of it is just that it was a really bad choice in yarn. Okay, so for White Baby Blanket, there is a pattern, I think it's called Diamonds, that I really, really love. I can put that in the comment section. I can put that in the comment section as well. But it basically works up, it's all double crochets, and you put chain twos, and then you do them in patterns so that they work into diamonds. And I don't have an example because I've given every baby blanket that I've made up like that away. But it's a really, really simple pattern. It's mostly solid, but it's interesting enough because every row is different because you have to work the chain spaces in different spots. And so you have to sort of be paying attention to what you're doing, and it works up into these really cool diamond patterns. Again, super simple because it's just chains and double crochets. And then I usually put a simple border. I like small baby blankets personally. It like hurts me to see people walking around with crocheted or knitted baby blankets that are dragging on the ground and getting disgusting and ruined. So when I think of making a baby blanket for somebody, I want it small enough that it fits comfortably in an infant car seat, and maybe covers a toddler laying down. But like, it does not have to be big enough to fit a whole crib, because people don't put baby blankets in cribs anymore. Like, that's against the rules. So, um, kids don't use blankets until they're like 4 anymore. So, uh, anyway, I guess the point I'm making is that you want it small and useful for a car seat, a stroller, something like that, so it's not going to drag on the ground. And so I tend to make very small baby blankets. Um, and I guess I use between 3 and 4 balls of yarn. And again, I tend to use the Deborah Norville. I think they're a little bit bigger than 100 gram. They're probably 130 or 150 gram balls. They're probably 4 ounces, so about a pound of yarn for those. So hopefully that answers your question. So yeah, I'm just kind of scanning through here. Welcome to everybody who's a first timer to the stream. Like I said earlier in the stream, I'm going to try and do this more regularly, at like a set time. So I don't know if that time will work every single week, but I'm going to aim for Tuesday nights, just because it works best into my schedule. And I guess I'll probably have to look and see what I'm competing with on TV. I don't want Tuesday nights to end up being like This Is Us or something, and come fall, it's not going to work. So we'll see what goes on. Wednesday nights, I go to a local crochet night. I would strongly suggest, if any of you have any local yarn stores or library or something around that meets for a local group, they're a lot of fun to have yarn friends in the real world. So it's kind of just fun to meet up with people who also just like to sit and knit or crochet. So that would be my suggestion if you've got something around or a group around, to get involved with them. A lot of times there are a surprising amount of groups in a very small area. I live in central Illinois, and there's probably, I don't know, 2 dozen, maybe 3 dozen that meet every single week. So you got your pick. If you go to a group and it's not a good fit for you, I would strongly suggest you go to another one until you find a good fit. Not every group is going to be for everybody. And I know not every region or area has as many groups as I have access to. So I guess I should take that, or you should take that advice with a grain of salt. But that would be my suggestion. In addition to joining me here, definitely find yarn friends out in the world, because it's a lot of fun to just hang out with yarn people. So I don't mind taking a few more questions, and I'm going to pull out a little bit more yarn and show that to you guys. Have I made anything with alpaca yarn? Actually, I have one item with alpaca yarn. I know I threw it in this bin. Give me 1 second. I'm going to dig it out. Ah, there they are. So, I have these fingerless gloves that I wear all the time. These are 100% alpaca. Alpaca is a really, really strange fiber to work with. It is cold to the touch. Like these feel cool, but they are insanely warm when you wear them. And so I've worn these. They're starting to get a little pilled, and I think this got stuck to Velcro here, so it's pretty messed up right there. But I love these gloves. They're super simple to make up. And I made this pair for myself, and then a coworker really, really loved the yarn, and I had enough to make a second pair of gloves out of the alpaca, and so I made 2 pairs out of 100 grams of yarn, and she just basically paid me for the yarn. I did the crocheting for free. So, yeah, I have these out of alpaca. I have more alpaca to work up, but I have a lot more yarn than I'll ever be able to crochet, and that doesn't stop me from buying more. So at some point in time, I'll have to get rid of a whole bunch of yarn, I guess, but it's fun to have and collect and look at and touch and bring out to show with you guys. So I actually have a little bit more alpaca here. This is another one of the yarns that I bought at that alpaca show that I went to locally. It has some of the coolest sparkly stuff in it that I've ever seen. It has these long, like rainbow sparkles in it that look like they're going to be sharp, and they are ultra soft. Like everything about this yarn is just super, super soft. And like I said, these look like they're going to be like sharp, and they're just not. Like they're ultra, ultra soft. So I have no idea what I'm going to work this into. It has a ton of like hair. So the stitches are going to be difficult to see, and I only have a pretty small amount. I think this is only like 50. It's 200 yards, so there's more here than I thought there was. But probably destined to be a pair of fingerless gloves, honestly, because it's really pretty in a small amount. Okay. If anyone else has questions, again, I'm going to just pull out some yarn from my pile and take a few more questions, and then probably wrap things up for the night. So, try and pull out some random different fibers. So, let's see what else I've got besides just straight wool. I don't have much cotton. You can occasionally get hand-dyed cotton. So I have, this here is 100% linen. This came from Yarn Rainbows, which is a importer from Lithuania. I'm not positive if this is hand-dyed or if it's just a, there's sort of 3 levels of yarn. There's big box store, there's hand-dyed, and then in between is a local yarn store level of yarn, which are exclusive brands that are only available in small yarn stores. So I'm not sure if this is a local yarn store brand or hand-dyed. It's a little bit unclear, again, because it's imported. It's a little harder to get the history, but this is 100% linen. I have this one here, and I wish you guys could all touch this. It's just the softest thing. This is 100% mulberry silk. And again, it came in really tiny skeins and is just the softest thing. This is only 50-gram ball of fingering weight. I also have 3 balls of this in white that I really want to make some sort of winter shawl out of, and I have not found the perfect pattern yet. The pattern for fingerless gloves is, I think it's probably going to have to be, again, one of the ones that I look up. It could be from Rachie Nguyen Designs, but I cannot remember. It looks like it's a pattern that's done a ribbed cuff here, and then shells worked sideways with the thumb hole worked on the side. So I will see if I can find this pattern and put it in the comment section. I think I can tag individual people. I'm not 100% sure that works, if I can call out an individual person. Otherwise, I will put it in there and check back in a day or so, and the video will process, and and all of those comments and stuff or my patterns will all be available. I'll try and get as many of the ones that you guys have asked for in there. I think somebody was asking for clarification on the this little skein. This is mulberry silk, so it's a silk, but not from silkworms. It goes through a process, but it comes from mulberry something. I don't know if it's from trees or if it's from mulberries. I'm not really sure the process in making mulberry silk. But it's not, as far as I understand, it's not silkworm silk. But it is crazy, crazy soft. This is more alpaca. This is very, very similar to this one that I showed here before. Instead of having rainbow sparkles in here, it has these really bright purple, and I'm not sure how well it shows up on camera, but they're really, really cool. The alpaca show that we went to was the first time I'd ever seen. So I guess I should back up a little bit. When you buy indie dyed yarns, usually when they're sparkly, they use a thing called stellina in them, which is blended in with the fiber instead of being wrapped around the outside. So if you get a yarn from a big box store, a lot of times, if it's sparkly, there's a sparkly thread wrapped around the outside of the yarn. When you buy them from indie dyers, the sparkle tends to be blended in with the fiber and is what we call an intimate blend. So the little sparkles are all mixed in the fiber, not wrapped around. And this was the first time I had seen multicolored stellina. So they had pretty much any color you could think of, including this like rainbow sparkly stuff, the purple that I bought. And then because it was an alpaca show and a lot of people were there buying fiber to be spun, you could actually buy all the stellina loose and mix it in with your fiber, which I thought was pretty cool. So I did not buy any because I don't spin yarn, because I already don't have time to crochet everything I own. I certainly don't have time to make all of the yarn and then crochet it. Okay, so I stand corrected. It is silk from silkworms, but mulberry silk is made from silkworms only fed mulberry leaves. I have no idea why that's relevant. I guess maybe it's softer or apparently it's more uniform. So I guess it is 100% silk from silkworms that were only fed mulberry silk. It's really expensive, I can tell you that much. I actually got this on a yarn store that was going out of business, so I got a really good deal on it. But the list price on this is pretty high. This is from Malbrigo. And like I said, it's only it's only 50 grams, but cost about as much as any of these other ones. And then last but not least here, I have some Tencel. Tencel is from wood pulp, and I don't really know how to describe the feel of Tencel. It feels like your hair does underwater. I know that's kind of a strange analogy, but it's almost fluid. It's so soft and silky. And it reminds me of being in the pool and your hair like floating around, and feeling really soft and silky. It obviously does not feel wet. It's just like the slipperiest, softest, nicest feeling thing. And I have not figured out what I want to do with this. Super, super soft things like this feel really nice when they're balled up like this, but a lot of times they don't have enough structure to make a good article of clothing. So really this is probably destined to be a shawl or a cowl, because it would not make a good hat or fingerless gloves or something like that, because it just has no structure and no ability to stay in a shape. It's just going to sort of melt. So maybe it would be okay for a baggy hat, like a like a droopy beanie, basically, but it's going to stretch out around the headband and not really hold its shape, I suspect. I haven't actually worked with it, so I'm not 100% sure, but just based on its feel, it's so drapey that it's going to be really only good to be a shawl or a cowl or something really loose like that. All right, just kind of scrolling through comments here, and yeah, so I had heard of mulberry silk, but I obviously did not know what it was really. I thought it was a plant derived sort of synthetic silk, but turns out it's actual real silk from a very specific type of silkworm, I guess. So yeah, I guess we learn something new every day. With that being said, I can keep pulling yarn for days and days and days, but I think I'm going to wrap up for the evening. If you have any last minute questions, I can take those real quick and then probably say goodbye for the week and try this again next week, and maybe we'll come up with some other new topic. If you have a suggestion on something you want to see next week, I'd be happy to hear those. Coming up with live stream topics is a little bit tricky. So I'm all ears on live stream topics. All right. So the problem with using wireless lav mics is that they are on batteries and die pretty regularly. And actually, these ones seem to have a problem. They don't hold a battery life anywhere near what they're supposed to. So thank you for letting me know that we lost audio. But anyway, what I was saying to answer the question about raising alpacas is that my sister had alpacas for a very short amount of time, and they were a lot of trouble. And caused all sorts of havoc. They got stuck in a trench that they were digging, and so we refer to alpacas around my house as trench camels, because they got stuck and they had to be lifted out with all sorts of difficulty. So, and then on top of that, they have to be fed and cared for and all of that, and then they have to be sheared, and then that has to be turned into yarn, and it's a lot cheaper to just go buy oodles and oodles of alpaca from somebody else who raises them is the short answer to that. So all right, well, I'm going to wrap up for the evening and put all of my yarn away again. And if you guys have any suggestions, I'd love to hear them. You can message me directly on Facebook and Instagram at Experiments in Crafting, or it's in the comment below. Like to see, I tried. It seemed like some responses on my question on what people would like to see. So maybe if I get a couple ideas, I can put a poll up and let you guys decide what we talk about next week. But otherwise, unless I have a major conflict, I will be back here next Tuesday, and I hope to see you all then. Usually about 8 o'clock is when we're able to get streaming. It really just depends on my schedule. And And again, we're on Central Time here, so Illinois time, 8 o'clock is about when we're able to get the stream up and running. So look for messages on Facebook and Instagram and on the community tab on my page. And hope to see you guys next week. Have a good night.